This is Chris.
And this is Marcy.
And we're starting out a new podcast. Now, we're not very familiar with the whole podcast format. And what this is all going to be about is we really like the Bible. And we really like going through everything in the Bible. We love the story and has so much of adventure and action, romance. It's got betrayal and restoration. It has so many good elements of a good story, and I think it's missed so often.
It's the original soap opera.
It really is. It's the original soap opera. You got so much stuff inside of it, and one of the things we're trying to do here is make it easier for you to understand by telling you the story. Now, don't click away, because what we're going to be doing here is that we're not going to be reading you the begats, the begattens, the begons, the bewitched, and all that. What we're going to be doing is that it's going to be where we will be talking about discussing
our insights.
And that comes to my second point all around here as well. Another reason I really wanted to do this was basically for the reason that I want to be able to continue the conversation, Yeah. I wanted to lay my cards out on the table, and, I wanted things to grow from there.
Right.
You always get so bogged down sometimes in what we believe. God calls us trees. He calls us plants in his garden. A tree that doesn't grow is a dead tree.
Right.
You consider it dead. And that's not to say that change is always good, because a tree that changes towards death is not a good tree. Like a vine start growing on the tree, it's no good. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that balancing point, get the conversation moving forward, and we're no experts. We're two people in the backyard in a shed here.
Right.
I mean, we don't really know much, but we know something.
We know God.
We know God, and I think it's going to be. I really hope that you can gain something from this, and I really want more than anything else to gain something from you as well.
Right.
So we'll be providing the stuff, our insights into it. We'll be providing all the cultural and historical context of this. And because you get a lot of differences in cultural context. People can't understand the Bible because not only because of the cultural context, but because of the historical context. You get something like the North and the South in America. The differences just culturally there
right.
is just phenomenally different, and you can totally tell a difference between the two. It's the same when you talk about cultural differences on top of that, historical differences.
Well, speaking of historical differences, why don't you tell the people a little bit about how you came to know God?
Well, it's not exactly like a one-step process. It was a lifetime.
That's good.
It was a lifetime where it was building up to it. It was almost like the sun coming over a mountain.
That's a really good analogy.
You could see the light coming, but you didn't know where it was, and you didn't even know kind of what it was, and everything was still in shadows until all of a sudden there was this great light. And I kind of like to think that I was that plant at the bottom of the hill, and as soon as I got that light, I started growing. I haven't stopped growing since, and I hope I continue to grow even further.
And that's what I think we're working toward with this podcast, is just encouraging people to read and grow and maybe look at the Bible from a different point of view. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you are, Chris, so I've got a little bit more life experience, but I have a different kind of story. I actually came to know God when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
And in my little old church in a small little town, I mean, it doesn't get any more all-American than that, but my entire life I have felt like God has had his hand on me. And I truly believe that when people take the time to read his word, he will reveal things to them. And whether they're reading the stories that are in there, or whether they're reading the book of Psalms for inspiration and comfort, God will be there. God will be there in His Word. And, it's my prayer that as we do this, we're able to just bring people into our stories some, and like you said, get to know people through their stories.
Yeah, and what I think about the Bible is that every single thing in there will be revealed to you in time. I think there was a lot of primary sources. I'm the historical side of all this. There's a lot of the primary sources that you get from this, and it is good for us, and I think it's good for everybody. But we have to also understand it in its historical context and who it was being presented towards as well.
Exactly, because that changes things a bit.
Yes, actually, because you also get because sometimes we get this second notion that every single thing was meant for all time for all people.
Right.
And that's kind of what we get stuck in sometimes.
Yeah.
Um,
So you want to talk a little bit about the name of our podcast?
So the name of our podcast, in case you hadn't noticed, but the name of our podcast is Spirit in the Shed, and it's basically how it sounds. We're two people.
Two old people.
Two old people. I'm an old.
You're fired from the podcast.
I'm an old person.
I'll be the old person. You be the young guy.
I'll be the young guy. Yeah, that's how that'll work. But yeah, we're just two friends here in the backyard in the shed. We're not experts. We're just putting our voice out there, and we're helping to continue this conversation going forward.
And some people may wonder why a shed. Well, apparently sheds are the thing now, and everybody's got a clubhouse.
It's a cool thing.
And
it's all the cool kids are doing.
That's right. And so, my wife and I put the shed together to hang out and get away from the world a little bit. We listen to music in here. We have our friends come over and hang out in here. We worship in here. We pray in here. We read the Bible in here. And we have long discussions with people in here. And that's really what we're hoping to have here, is just a discussion with anybody that wants to listen and maybe give us some feedback.
Yeah, and this whole thing is going to be, we really just want to try and get through the story, the entire narrative. We'll get to the other stuff a little bit later, and honestly, if you want something different, if you're begging for us to talk about some certain things, just let us know, honestly. And if this format isn't working out for you and you're begging for something else, we'll stop the narrative thing. We'll talk about other things. Yeah. We got so much things that we really want to talk about. But I really felt like I really wanted to tell this story, and I really wanted you to be able to hear it, because it's an amazing story.
It absolutely is an amazing story, and we joked a little bit just a few minutes ago about it being the original soap opera, but it absolutely is a love story. It's God's love story for man, and all of the stories that we read in here, from creation to Daniel in the lion's den to David and Goliath, it all comes back to how much God loves us and provides for all the needs that we have. So we just want to share that.
And it all just comes down to a single point. This entire story is just leading up to one single point in history. And I think it's really incredible that you see that throughout the entire Bible.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's without further ado, we're Spirit in the Shed. I'm Chris.
And I'm Marcy.
And let's get started.
So, the first story that's actually laid out in the Bible is, guess what? In the beginning.
In the beginning.
God created.
Unless you didn't know that. I hope you do now.
Right? Right. So, in the beginning, God created. And, a lot of times we get hung up on thinking, oh, God created man.
Boom,
we were created,
done.
Let's move on.
Let's move on.
There's so much that he did create in that time. And so, I'm just going to have my Bible handy. We're not going to read the entire story for you word for word. We hope that you will take the time to do that.
Exactly. And some context about this book of Genesis, it was written, it's credited to being written by Moses, although there are some critics that say it's written by multiple people. So if you hear, well, Moses, when he wrote about this, it's like, wait a minute, what? Who? Where did Moses come from?
Right.
Well, that's where we're getting it from, because
Moses hadn't been created yet.
Moses hadn't been created yet. So, what'd you really think about that creation story?
Well, I thought it was really interesting, and that's one of the stories that a lot of people will get hung up on some details. For instance, it'll say things like evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. And people will get hung up on whether it was a literal 24-hour day or whether it was a 1,000-year day, because, it says to God, a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day.
Right, exactly.
But I think that's one of those points and details that we don't need to get hung up on. I think that focusing more on what was created and how he created.
Exactly. I think the reason why is more important than the what.
Exactly.
And yeah, and and honestly, if you really want to get focused on that, I'm not gonna be saying like you shouldn't be doing this. I used to be that way myself. And you know what? I think it really shows how much passion you have for the word. I just don't think that the dividing of hairs should become a dividing of people.
Because the ultimate point of the love story of God is Jesus.
Exactly.
And when we start to get divided on little things like whether or not a day was a day, sometimes it takes us away from the point of Jesus. So let's talk about creation. The first day, what did God create on the first day? He said the heavens and the earth were created. And the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. So pretty much there was nothing. Nothing. Yep. So God created something from nothing. It's what he does.
I think that's another narrative that you're going to see throughout the Bible as well. He's able to create stuff where there was no hope in that stuff ever being created in the first place.
And that is what's really hard for a lot of people to get, is that he created something from nothing.
Exactly.
But what did he create? He created light. And how did he create it? God said, let there be light. And there was light. And, that's one of those things that I don't think there's any theologist or historian or spiritual human or worldly human that can really look at this and say, oh, well, he just said, let there be light, and it did, and so that's okay. I think it confuses people across the world, and the more we think about it, the more confused we can get.
We can't understand that. It's like trying to think about infinity.
And it's the most beautiful thing about God, is that he doesn't expect us to try to understand everything. Exactly. And sometimes it's okay for us to not understand.
Actually, it's this point that I'm getting in the book of Ecclesiastes as well. The book of Ecclesiastes says that of the making of books there is no end, and it's not saying you shouldn't go after that stuff. I commend you for going after it, but don't make it the point. Right,
because that is where your faith will grow, and it only takes a little faith,
right,
to start to comprehend amazing things. And the further we go on through these stories, the more we will talk about faith, and hopefully the more curious you'll become. It'll be like Alice in Wonderland, and we'll just get curiouser and curiouser. It'll be great. So on the first day, God created the heavens and the earth, and he made light, and he made darkness. And that was the first day. Now, to me, that's a lot of work to create that from nothing. So the second day, God created the space between the waters in the heavens and the waters of the earth. So when I was reading over this again, I've been reading the Bible for a while. I'm just going to be straight up and tell you, I'm almost 48, and 12 years old was a long time ago. And if there was one place that I always started reading the Bible, it was always, in the beginning, God created. I always got to that part.
We always just to try and start reading that whole book, and it just, our eyes glaze over, and just can't get through it,
So when I was reading this over again, it didn't even occur to me that there were waters in the heavens and waters in the earth. They were all together. I mean, just think about that. It's hard to comprehend. But God separated all those waters, and that's now why we have oceans. The waters on the earth became the oceans. He made them so that they flowed into one place. and made the dry land appear. And God